11 years and one promise later, Guantánamo Bay remains open. An early morning raid this weekend proved that the trouble and controversy surrounding the prison are far from over.
A story developing now at the U.S. military detention facility at Guantánamo Bay, Cuba. NBC's Michael Isikoff reports that guards raided the largest camp at Guantánamo early this morning and fired non-lethal shots as they tried to end a growing protest.
We'll discuss the administration's complicated and questionable counterterrorism strategies when the executive director of Human Rights Watch joins us next on Now.
Make no mistake, we will close Guantánamo Prison, which has damaged our national security interests and become a tremendous recruiting tool for al-Qaeda.
As a candidate, President Obama was a severe critic of President Bush's anti-terror policies and campaigned on a promise to close Guantánamo Bay Prison. But while his White House has since made changes regarding America's torture and rendition policies, in some very significant ways, the Obama administration has expanded the use of questionable and possibly illegal counterterrorism strategies. Gitmo was back in the news this weekend when a decision to punish detainees on hunger strike turned violent. According to the AP, lawyers for the prisoners say the hunger strike began on February 6th in protest over indefinite confinement and what prisoners believe to be tighter restrictions and intrusive searches. Back in January, with little fanfare, the president dealt a blow to advocates seeking to close Gitmo by announcing that he was instead shutting the State Department office tasked with closing down the facility. NPR reports that Guantanamo's prisoner population has shrunk by roughly a third under President Obama. No new prisoners have arrived in years, and its symbolic potency has diminished. That's in large part because instead of capturing suspected terrorists, the administration has turned to wiping them out. The latest example came yesterday when a U.S. drone strike killed at least 4 unidentified people along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Following a heated debate in February over the use of targeted drone strikes, the president made a promise in his State of the Union address.
I recognize that in our democracy, no one should just take my word for it that we're doing things the right way. So in the months ahead, I will continue to engage Congress to ensure not only that our targeting, detention, and prosecution of terrorists remains consistent with our laws and system of checks and balances, but that our efforts are even more transparent to the American people and to the world.
But on President Obama's watch, the use of drones has increased 7-fold, and that promise to be more transparent has yet to materialize. An exhaustive report last week by the McClatchy News Organization, which obtained access to classified documents detailing the administration's drone program, revealed that contrary to assurances that it has deployed U.S. drones only against known senior leaders of al-Qaeda and allied groups, the Obama administration has targeted and killed hundreds of suspected lower-level Afghan, Pakistani, and unidentified other militants. The report also indicates that despite the administration's guarantees of accuracy, drone operators weren't always certain who they were killing. The article caused widespread consternation among human rights organizations, prompting 10 of them, including the ACLU, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch, to write a letter to the president expressing their deep concerns. Joining us now is the executive director of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth. Kenneth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
I think it's fairly shocking when you read that McClatchy report. Not just the inaccuracy, but the veil of transparency, the repeated use of drone strikes that are killing we don't know who. I mean, the fact that this continues to be counterterrorism policy is more than disturbing, I think, to most Americans.
No, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you saw President Obama here promise greater transparency. That hasn't happened. To this day, occasionally there's a spokesperson who goes out and makes some vague pronouncement about the rules governing the drone strikes. But in fact, we know virtually nothing about the actual concrete limits that the administration considers governing its drone strikes. So there's a big problem there of transparency. And this is a problem not just for the people being attacked today, but imagine how Putin or the Chinese government are going to draw on this precedent to stretch it even further to conduct their own drone strikes against their own perceived enemies.
in the letter you write, U.S. targeted killing policies and practices will set a precedent for other nations, particularly as weaponized drone technology becomes more widely available. Lowering the threshold for the use of force outside armed conflicts could be in breach of international law, set a dangerous precedent, and weaken the U.S. government's ability to argue for constraints on lethal targeting operations of other states.
No, exactly. And this is not just theoretical. The Chinese government, we know, just recently was contemplating a drone strike kill in Burma against a drug trafficker. This is going to happen more and more. And if Obama is not willing to articulate and abide by clear rules that limit when these killings can occur, you can just imagine how this loophole is going to be exploited by others.
Wes, you have seen combat, and you know we talk a lot about the fog of war. There's also this sort of how this is furthering our long-term foreign policy and national security goals. And you look at what has happened in Pakistan. Disapproval of U.S. leadership under Obama. 92% of the country disapproves of the president. 4% approves, and most outside analysis says that's due in large part because of the use of drone strikes inside the country. Well,
and that's, I think, it's important for people to understand what exactly that is and what that means. I mean, literally you have these aerial drones which are completely out of any type of visual view, and a person is literally, whether it be sleeping there or, in any type of confinement, and then out of nowhere you have Hellfire missile, some of the missile that comes and can take out an entire area. The danger that I have, and again, this also goes back to the challenge of short-term accomplishment versus long-term challenge that comes in, and the argument of winning hearts and minds, the argument of how exactly do you derive intelligence, all these kind of arguments that come into this thing. The biggest challenge I think we have is actually dovetailing back on this earlier point, is how exactly do we justify this, and how exactly do we curtail its use? Look at what happened after the use of the first atomic bomb, where then the big question and the big race became of how exactly do you control who can then have an atomic bomb and who then can actually use it.
Right.
And so since we haven't had this full conversation, since we haven't gone through this process, I think that becomes really one of the most complicated challenges of this entire drone argument of what exactly that means for long-term.
Well, and Ken, we talk about this, the technology is far ahead of sort of the moral debate over whether we should be using this kind of technology. And I do want to address Gitmo insofar as it's still open. Yeah. And there seems to be no way to close it. The State Department office tasked with closing it is no longer operational. Congress has been totally uncooperative. But you have these men who are striking, who have not been eating. There is an op-ed in the New York Times that everybody should read. It is not only stomach-churning in terms of the suffering that's happening, but you think this is happening under the watch of the United States government? I'll read just a short excerpt from detainee Samir Naji al-Hassan Moghbel. He writes, "I've been detained at Gitmo for 11 years and 3 months. I have never been charged with any crime. I have never received a trial. There are so many of us on hunger strike now that there aren't enough qualified medical staff members to carry out the force feedings. Nothing is happening at regular intervals. They are feeding people around the clock just to keep up."
Yeah. Well, I think when most of us think of Gitmo these days, we think of, say, the trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged leader of the 9/11 attack. And I was actually down in Guantánamo for the arraignment of that case. And there are big problems there just because this is a brand new court system. The military commissions, huge problems. It's clear that these suspects would have been much more quickly and fairly convicted if they'd simply been brought here to Manhattan in a regular federal court rather than try this made-up brand new procedure down in Guantánamo. But the hunger strikers are a different set of people. They're the anonymous people, people from Yemen and other countries who are really not even deemed a threat anymore. They can't be sent back because the U.S. government doesn't have enough confidence in the Yemeni government to keep tabs on them. And so they are just sitting in Guantánamo endlessly. They don't have a trial coming. They've never been charged. They are just sitting there, and they are in utter despair, such despair that they're willing to put up with these horrible force-feeding procedures just to try to make their point that something's got to be done.
And in fact, in this op-ed, he says, "I am willing to die," because what he is living with is no kind of life at all. Yeah. I mean, I think we unfortunately have to wrap it here, but Ken, this is an issue that is so under-discussed, and I think that has been in large part a fail on the part of the progressive community not to hold the president to higher standards, in some part the news media for not shedding light on it, but the work that you guys are doing should be applauded, and especially the letter that's been written to draw attention to exactly what's happening and to push the administration on those issues that the president wrote in.
I think you're absolutely right. In other words, Obama just doesn't care about this. He's not going to fight the political battles. He's got other things going, and we've got to remind him that this is a key point of principle. It's wrong to simply detain these people forever when the U.S. has nothing on them, no willingness even to charge them with a crime.
Kenneth Roth from Human Rights Watch, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for the work that you're doing.